Hi, I'm Cash McKellen, and welcome back to my podcast. We have some amazing guests on again this evening. We have an amazing designer and developer out of Los Angeles, California, here to talk to you about the devastation, the rebuild, and what's happening with all the LA aftermath after the fires. We have George Avatician with Avatect Design Company here. And also we have our infamous lender back on once again, Mr. Dave D'Souza, and he's going to talk with us this evening about what's going on currently with our interest rates and the 10-year treasury yield, what's happening with that, and the speculations going forward. So really excited to have him on. George, welcome to our show again, my friend.
Hello, Cash. Pleasure to be here, sir.
Fantastic. And Dave, welcome aboard, buddy.
Good to be back with you, my friend. Thank you for having us.
Great. All right. Dave, let's start with you, man. Let's start with what's going on with the interest rates out there. If you could kind of brief everybody, our listeners out there, where our rates are at today, you know, with the different things like FHA, conventional, what's shaking and all that area with VA, kind of break that down real quick if you could. And then if we talk about that 10-year treasury yield and your speculations going forward.
All right. Well, I'll start with a quick recap of last week. Thank you, Cash. And then I'll sort of round out into a broader picture of what things might affect us going forward.
Perfect.
On a quick recap for last week. And by the way, a couple of other side notes before I give you the recap. If you are planning a mortgage transaction, purchase or refinance, either in 2025 or very early 2026, and especially if you're self-employed or have rental property, please consider sending us your tax returns prior to doing the transaction to review them. Because if your CPA, who operates at cross purposes from us as a banker, writes off a lot of stuff to save you taxes, that could affect you in qualifying, it could affect you in your interest rate for a mortgage. So that's something to bear in mind. And for a quick recap of rates from last week to this week, we saw a slight improvement on interest rates. The last week we were at a par rate of 6.75, ended this week today at a par rate of 6.625. So about an eighth of an improvement on that.
Nice.
Stocks ended up the week relatively flat. There are two kinds of things that affect interest rates. There's the short-term things, like things that could happen in the news and Wall Street might have a knee-jerk reaction to, and we've discussed some of those topics previously. And then there are longer term things, and this is a slight segue into the longer term things that affect interest rates. There is something that the Federal Reserve keeps mentioning called a dual mandate. And that dual mandate, whether you agree or disagree with how they've come up with it, it is the formula that they use, and this whole concept of a dual mandate and what numbers they're using is fairly old. It's an older concept. There are many that believe that this should be revamped, it should be recalculated, this should be rediscussed, renegotiated so that there's a different platform of how it's approached. But the dual mandate that the Federal Reserve is currently using, right, wrong, or indifferent, is A, keeping inflation as close as they can to a 2% annual target, and keeping wage growth and jobs and employment and the employment situation stable. So ideally, they want to see a stable employment situation with unemployment down. As a matter of fact, just today with the January jobs report, we saw a 0.1 decrease in unemployment, even though the total number of jobs added for January was quite a bit less than what was anticipated, which actually helped interest rates a little bit. So again, and right now inflation is in the upper twos, mid to upper twos-ish. And again, right, wrong, or indifferent, the Fed's current target rate is 2%. So if we have inflation staying where it is and we see a stable to growing job market, that could have some bearing on a negative impact on interest rates coming down, but we're hopeful.
Dave, when you say inflation in the upper twos, do you mean like 2.99? We're getting close to 3, or what are you talking about?
Well, right now, I think we're where inflation is, and the numbers can change slightly depending on what source you use. But I think we're in the approximate 2.8, 2.9% range. And then there's two types of inflation. There's inflation and then there's core inflation. Core inflation always strips out food, energy, because those are somewhat more seasonal. So when the Federal Reserve looks at inflation, they look at two numbers. They look at core inflation and then they look at general inflation. Both of those numbers right now are slightly higher than the Fed's target rate of 2%. Again, that's not to say that 2% should be the target. It's debatable whether, there's people that agree with that, there's people that disagree. But
Okay.
from a broader perspective, like right, wrong, or indifferent, unfortunately, at the present time, this is what the Fed is using as their gauge, is a 2% number that they're shooting for. So if
Right.
we saw inflation at 2% and a wage employment situation that was stable, we would certainly see more room for improvement in interest rates.
Dave, I'll
Um,
tell you, the only time I'd ever seen 2% pop up in my life so much is when I used to open the fridge and see 2% milk. Now I see 2% all the time with the Fed talking about what he wants to get that inflationary rate to. 2%. We've been hearing that for a long time. Been a tough one. Yeah, he's gotten close, but hasn't quite made it. So in our previous administration, though, we did get to a 1.9 actually. And it's pretty interesting because we had tariffs at that time, you know? So,
well, let's just staying on focus for presently with what's happening with the current inflation rate. I will say this. I personally, and this is my opinion, I want to give a disclaimer that this is my personal opinion. This is not the Fed. This is me.
okay. Sure.
My opinion is that a 2% target rate is somewhat to slightly unrealistic at the moment. When you go through what we've recently been through with supply chain issues and vendors and sellers being so greedy, look at the price of eggs, look at the price of milk, look at the price of groceries, look at the cost of Cash's lunch every week or every day.
Right. Right.
Look at the cost of my coffee every morning. When you've got sellers and vendors that provide these goods and services being so greedy, think about when was the last time you opened your cable bill or your insurance and they said, oh, we're having a rate decrease. It's always, we're having a rate increase. We're having a rate
Right.
increase.
Right.
So when you have a situation like that, trying to get to a 2% number, in my opinion, is slightly unrealistic. But again, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what the Fed seems to be targeting at the moment.
I
That
could
is
agree with you. I
my
agree with you, Dave. Actually, I believe it. But did I say I agree with you, Dave? I agree with you, Dave. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I think we could, I think a number maybe closer to 2.4, 2.5% might be a little bit more realistic.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't get to make the rules. We just get to play by them. And just, I want to just recap. You know, the December job numbers was huge. It was off the charts. It was about over 300,000 new jobs added. And this month, in comparison, they targeted 168 was the new jobs for January that
All
was
right.
supposed to come out today. They added only 143,000. So the number of
143,000.
jobs added, this is showing a little bit of, slight give in the jobs market, which is actually good news for us on the interest rate front, because if this job market continues to soften and combined with that, we see an improvement in inflation,
Right.
then we will see interest rates improve.
Nice.
That's
Nice.
my
Okay.
recap. If there's any questions you have, feel free to shoot them over. And thank you for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely, Dave. Always appreciate that. And Dave is always easy to reach to or reach to me, and I'll make sure we connect you with Dave anytime, any questions you have. So we want to make sure everybody is definitely informed and knowledgeable. And Dave has got an incredible amount of knowledge, and he's very on top of everything that's going on in the lending world for sure, 100%. So thank you very much, Dave.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
that.
Cash. Appreciate that.
We'll come back a little bit later for some more questions. But let's talk about what's going on in LA with the rebuild and what's happening. There's so much to talk about. We have so many different things. We could talk for hours and hours and days and days and days, but we're going to try to narrow it down to some of the most important things people are asking about out there right now, like insurance questions and things of that nature, and what they're going to do to rebuild and how that's going to look with permitting and all of these different elements. And hopefully we have our Zach Schneiderman, our in-house insurance agent here from the Valley. He's going to join us here at some point tonight. He had an appointment. He couldn't make it, so he's going to try to jump into our podcast here maybe the next 15, 20 minutes. If he does, we'll get him on and answer a couple questions about insurance. But for right now, we have the man, the myth, the legend in here, George Avatician on here, and we're going to talk about building, rebuilding, and what's going to happen in LA. And George, you talk about wealth of knowledge. This guy, I've been in his office, super impressed with a bunch of the renderings he had of some other properties in there. I mean, big, gorgeous, beautiful drafts in there. Unbelievable. This guy really knows what he's talking about. We had him on last week. We talked about permitting and some of the things going on in LA and how they're going to handle a lot of the debris removal. Where are they going to put it at? Great question that his daughter actually asked. And hey, kudos to her for that. But George, no further ado, let's get George Avatisi on here and ask him a couple of questions. George, welcome back to the show, pal. What are you seeing going on out there right now in LA?
Right now, basically, they're trying to figure out how FEMA is going to be involved, right? So again, going back to my experience with the Woolsey fire, FEMA was the one that actually came out and cleaned out the entire properties. And right now, there's a little bit of talk where they're considering that potentially that FEMA is going to get paid by the insurance companies. And I'm not the insurance expert. I don't know what necessarily is going to happen there. But
Right.
Originally, during the Woolsey fire, the FEMA came out and they actually cleaned out the entire property. They did the hazard removal. They took out the foundation. They basically prepped the property for us to be able to come in and start building on it.
Right.
So that's a big question right now as far as when is that going to happen? How long is it going to take? People are still kind of questioning um, when we can technically get in to be able to do just even our general requirements. I mean, yeah, we're talking about potentially like a coastal commission not having to be involved, CEQA not having to be involved, which is again come back to question again in this last week or so.
That's huge, right? And that's big time,
course.
right?
Yeah, the Environmental Act, exactly. So, and then from that point moving forward, we still need to get in there to be able to do surveys because a lot of the properties, whether it's the properties in Altadena from the Eaton fire or the Pacific Palisades area and the fires that happened there, we still need to get in to be able to do surveys. Besides the surveys, we need to get in to be able to do soils reports. We can't do any of that right now because of the hazardous materials that are technically still on site. So, again, like I mentioned last time, we could still go ahead and start the actual design process, right?
Okay.
We don't need the survey to be able to start the design process, to be able to submit the plans. We have certain different websites that we can go to be able to get some information. Again, Navigate LA, Zima's reference to LA City, of course, and then of course we have the LA County websites that we can go to as well to be able to get some general information for us to start the design process. And that's exactly how we've started doing it for now until we can actually have our surveyors and our geologists or soils engineers to be able to go out on site and be able to actually do what we need to do for us to know exactly how we're going to go about, first of all, designing the project, and second of all, having the engineer design the foundation relative to the soils report or geological report.
Okay. Wow. Fantastic. So it sounds like maybe things are moving along a little bit more expeditiously than they normally would in a situation like this.
They are definitely trying. They are definitely trying to move things along. I had a discussion with one of the inspectors that I know, and the sheer capacity of employees that the building department is going to need to employ for all of these plan checks to happen, besides efficiently, just to make sure that everything is done correctly, right? I mean, there's a lot of different departments. I mean, the one thing I think that we haven't really touched on, and maybe this is something that we'll touch on if we ever decide to talk about part of the ADU or just the general process in all the different departments that are involved with the building department, right? So just for quick reference, we have, of course, the planning department, we have the building department, we have building and records, we have the mechanical department, we have the fire department, public works, grading, Bureau of Engineering, and so forth and so on. All these different departments are what we technically call clearances the minute we submit the plans. But we can get a little bit more involved in that at a later date. But they are attempting to try to see how we can make it more efficient to go through all these different departments. But all of these different departments are already kind of overwhelmed with the current projects that are out there, right? So how are they going to be able to bring and put together the staff necessary, not just building and safety, which technically has to do with life and safety, but whether it's the planning department, there are still various properties that we still have to get planning department clearances from or planning department approval from. So right. I'm not 100% sure how they're going to go about it. I do keep hearing good things as far as them being somewhat ready to be able to get on it and actually start doing the entire process strategically in one single location. Of course, that was mentioned to be somewhere in Westwood. So if they do get to that point, it's either going to tremendously delay everything, or they're going to have to actually employ a lot of people for this to be very efficient.
Gotcha. Okay. Uh, George, what do you think at this point? I know last week we talked about it a little bit, but still looking like about 24 months minimum to 3 years to get some of these homes rebuilt in the Palisades? Or are we looking at longer now or less time? What's that looking like?
Well, the rebuild process for any of these properties is like we talked about, from shovel to champagne, as Dave mentioned last week, which I love that term. That's
Yeah, that was great.
The shovel to champagne, you're talking at least 18 months, right?
And a minimum 18. Okay.
A minimum 18 months. Now, how is that going to be when it comes to the supply chain of actual employee, contractors and subcontractors? And I mean, there's going to be so many people that are going to be overwhelmed in our industry.
Yeah.
That I think that's going to also start to create delays as well. I mean,
Okay.
I've heard the term. I've heard actually about how some contractors are moving into Southern California from outside, whether it's Northern California, whether it's Nevada, whether it's Utah, Colorado. I've heard there's several contractors that are bringing their crews with them down to the LA area because there's going to be a tremendous amount of work. And there's also, like, I think we talked about it a little bit last time, how demolition contractors are probably should actually get to the point to where they're coming down here and they're getting ready to help. So part of it again goes back to how the sites are going to get cleared, right? And I know I'm going off on a tangent, and we'll go back. But as far as, like, if you can clear the site yourself, or does FEMA have to come in? And then, of course, we just kind of discussed the possibility of FEMA getting paid by the insurance company. In the Woolsey fire, from what I remember, FEMA came in and did everything and did not charge the property owner, did not charge the insurance company. And I know there's a little bit of back and forth right now trying to figure out if FEMA is actually going to get paid by the insurance company. Because, I mean, what was it? It wasn't very long ago that we all heard that FEMA's kind of low on funds or something. I'm not 100% sure.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right. 100%.
I mean, ultimately, there's a good amount of challenges. It's looking positive. It's looking that they're putting the correct people in the correct positions to be able to help get this done.
Okay.
George, can I ask a question about something you just said? In the course of what I do, I try to document everything that I possibly can, just so that I don't ever have to rely on conversation. And you said something just now about if people are going to start their own demolition or cleanup, would you suggest, or what are your thoughts on, before they start anything, documenting, taking pictures, connecting with their insurance company, so that there's some documentation of where they're actually starting versus, they do something on their own. And then at some point they've done a certain amount by themselves. And then the insurance company comes back and says, well, what was, it becomes ambiguous as to what was the actual state. So this is just my 2 cents. And again, you're much more in a position to comment on this than I. And maybe Zach would be the ideal person from an insurance perspective, but what thoughts do you have on what people should do before they actually start any cleanup as far as documenting the condition of the property?
Well, I think you said the correct word, document. So when it comes to anything relative to the property, start with getting just a contractor to come out and give you a bid to be able to clear the lot. Whether it's relative to the hazardous material, whether they're certified to be able to remove hazardous material, get all the documentation. Of course, it's not just paper. Of course, get it through email, some type of digital copy and hard copies, and keep both. And then get it to the insurance company and let them know what you're kind of planning, right? Let them know that, hey, these are the quotes that are coming in. We want to get this done as soon as possible. And then let the insurance company know exactly what your intentions are, right? Just in the same way where people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to build a patio in my backyard, but I don't want to pull a permit for it. I'm like, well, stop calling me, because I don't want to talk to anybody that is going to be building something that's not permitted, because that's my whole focus, is making sure that people have permits for everything. Because I've seen the opposite of that, where people have built without permits, and it just gets so difficult. But
Right.
let
Right. And
everybody know. I mean, like, if you have a contact at FEMA, let them know what your intentions are. Share your quotes with as far as the debris removal from the contractor that you got with your insurance company. Um, just make sure you're completely transparent on the entire process. That's probably the most important. But ultimately, the homeowner should seek the the professionals' opinions, whether it's the licensed contractor, whether it's the insurance agent, the loan agent, the real estate agent. I mean, like, look to everybody else to be able to potentially help you go in the right direction, and just be as transparent as possible.
right.
Document everything.
And George, relating to the permit question for people that are building or additions to their homes, and they, want to save a few dollars and get somebody unpermitted to do the job. Okay, might save a few dollars, and it might even be built in a real workman-like fashion and be completely solid. Challenge, though, from my knowledge and my experience, is that when you go to sell the home, or you want to get the value added to that home and it's unpermitted, that's a different ballgame. We have a new game on our hand.
100%. And this is like, I always like to think of the extreme, right? So let's take it into the context of building something without a permit, and then getting to the point to where you're using it, and you end up having a party and somebody ends up getting hurt uh, on this
Right.
part of a property that is not permitted. I
Right.
mean, like, insurance wise, that's a nightmare for insurance agents, because they basically just walk away. From my experience, they're just like, "Hey, you did this without permits. It's on you.
Yep.
If you don't have permits for this, we're not going to pay out anything." And then, I mean, like, worst case scenario, like fires. I mean, like, if you have a structure on your property that's not permitted, do you think the insurance company is going to cover an unpermitted structure on your property?
No.
Absolutely not. I don't think. Well,
No.
I've never seen them cover anything like that.
I've not seen it. That's why I wish we had Zach on tonight for these insurance questions, but maybe we'll have to pick that up next week with Zach, some more insurance questions like that. But yeah, from just a value perspective too, it becomes a challenge. I've sold lots of homes with things that were unpermitted, because that's just the way it is. Here we're going to go sell this home, and oh, by the way, last minute, this structure here, or this room addition there, or a lot of times patio covers in the back, whether they're completely solid or they're just like latticed. And sometimes they'll have a second floor on it too, unpermitted. That's very common that I've seen all across California, actually Idaho and Nevada as well too. Anywhere you go, this is very common. But the challenge is, like you said, insurability and value add when you start looking at those things. So bear that in mind if you're starting to think about going unpermitted and get that little bit of a deal today. It's going to cost you in the long run later, all the time, right, Jeff?
Correct. And that kind of also touches on the overall, like, right way of doing things, and actually hiring a licensed contractor. And there's a way in which, when we pull permits, the contractor can actually put their name on the actual permit. That means they become responsible for the project itself, right?
Oh,
So,
wow.
and that's why the insurance, contractors have the insurance, the bond, and everything relative for them to show that they are valid on doing the work itself.
Gotcha.
So I highly recommend that to everyone.
Get it permitted, folks. Get it done right. Get it done the first time. Get it done right. George, thank you for that. Hey, Dave and George, want to ask, we were kind of roundtabling a little bit before we got on the podcast here. And David touched on about the mood in LA. Great thing to bring up too, Dave and George. Because you guys are boots on the ground there, you're living there, you're working there. What are you guys seeing as far as an overall mood these days after these fires?
The mood in general at the moment seems to be slightly conservative, slightly more reserved. I think there's a lot of people that are in a wait and see mode. My particular approach to this is, unless you were considering buying in an area that was, very strongly affected, there's just like the holidays at the end of the year. When everyone else is pausing, maybe you could take advantage of the situation. And so my thought and my thought process to anyone who's in the home buying market is just food for thought. And again, this is not to in any way disrespect or set aside or minimize your thought process, your reserve, your mood. But the time to strike and the time to take advantage of the market is when everyone else is on pause. So again,
Sure.
with full respect for people that are whose mind frame and headspace and heart space are not in the place they would normally be, there are definitely, and I have clients that are definitely in a place now that says, hey, when everyone else is pausing, this is our time to strike. And that's
Absolutely
just
right.
the
Yeah.
feedback from both sides of the coin.
That's a good time to strike for sure, Dave. So, but the mood overall, just the overall consensus of the mood, you were saying you see more of a somber mood,
Yes.
if you will.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would agree. It's reserved. It's sort of a wait and see. And
A wait and see
that's
reserve.
human
Okay.
nature, right? Human nature is to wait and see rather than execute.
Absolutely. You know what? If I could just piggyback off that a little bit, Dave. Remember we were talking about if the rates are going to get back down to 3%, which we've been telling everybody, stop waiting for the rates to do that. They're not going to happen. The only way these rates are going to ever come back like that is if something catastrophic is to happen, right?
Yep.
War,
Pandemic, war, disaster, some sort
pandemic,
of disaster.
COVID's, all these things. And nobody wants that. Number one, nobody wants that to happen. So the rates come down just so that happens, right? So if you're waiting around for that, and then ask yourself this question, just like you just said, when devastation is happening and there's so much concern going on, is that the time that you're going to run out and make big, large purchases? Probably not. Probably not. Unless you've just got the backbone of some of these big investors with lots of money, then you're ready to strike. A little different deal. So really hard to compare the two. But to your point, yes, to buy, the buying time could be those kind of times. That's when you can scoop up on some great deals. But are you going to be willing and able? Are you going to have the gusto
I'll
for
just
that? Right?
give you a very quick analogy in the stock market. When the stock market tanks, there's two groups of people. There's those that flight. I'm gonna just drop and run.
Yeah.
And then there's those that see opportunity. And again, that is not to discount, disrespect, or minimize in any way, shape, or form the emotions that many Southern Californians are going through. But I will tell you from personal experience, there are clients that just everyday average people that are looking to buy a home, and the home they're looking to buy is not in the areas that were affected by the fires directly. And they are saying, hey, when everyone else is pausing, we're ready to move. And it's just food for thought. That's all.
Pounce when everyone's pausing. That's my note on that. So I've been hearing a lot of people lately too, just kind of accepting the rates where they're at right now, kind of sliding into that mode. Like, you know what? This is where the rates are going to be. This is it. This is our new normal, and maybe it'll come down a little bit more. Maybe it'll get a little bit better, but probably slowly. Surely, I don't know. That's yet to be seen, but probably some slight improvement here and there, but we don't know. I wouldn't play the waiting game on that, because the more the rates come down, the more activity we get, the more buyers come into the market, and prices continue to rise, right? I guess that's going to be relative to the inventory, and inventory has been rising too lately, but not that much. But it has been rising, and a lot of that could be because there's been houses on the market long. Days on market have increased. And that could be a lot because of the higher interest rate environment too that we've had. And we just got over the elections, and then LA had the fires, and it's been this and it's been that and it's been this and it's been that, so, but I am seeing a pickup. I am licensed in Idaho, and I'm licensed in Nevada. So I'm in Las Vegas, and I'm also in the Boise, Idaho market area, as well as Santa Clarita, California. So anyways, I'm seeing pickups. And I'm talking to other agents. I'm networking with lots of agents. So we're starting to see a little pickup in those states as well. Some of that could be from the displaced people in California as a result of the fires, or they're just tired of California. But I think we're seeing a big push from California, a little bit from Oregon and Washington as well. That's always been the case. But it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out with people who are just either tired of California, they don't want to wait anymore, or they've just been displaced and they want to go, and it's getting very expensive in California as well. That's another thing you've got to look at. So are you seeing a little bit more pickup with business as far as, hey, let's get this design and let's get that developed and those kind of things?
I am, and we're getting a lot of inquiries still, and I think these are the people that are on the other end of the spectrum, where they're not sitting around and waiting. They're actually ready to kind of jump into it and go, hey, you know what? I know the market's going to get overwhelmed with building, we're going to get a lot of contractors that are not going to be able to take on jobs for a year or two because they're going to be so backed up. So yeah, we are seeing inquiries, and these are the people that are majority of the time. Well, let's just put it this way: few of the potential clients and clients, the houses that they had that burnt down were their second homes. So
Okay.
it wasn't their primary residence, whether they were renting it out, whether they were using it as a weekend home or whatever it is. Those people, they still have a house. So they're just ready to jump into it and go, hey, you know what? Let's design it. Let's get it into the city. Let's make sure we do this as quickly as possible because we know the city's going to get backed up, contractors are going to get backed up, and it's going to become a nightmare, especially in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
So the one thing that, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but I was going to ask Dave this. I read an article regarding interest rates where it said the average interest rate for the life of home interest rates and mortgages is concerned, the average number is about 7%.
Yeah.
I'm
You're
not
talking
sure
like on a 30-year.
No, not today. I'm talking ever since we've had
Yeah.
home loans, right?
Yeah.
So that if you take all the numbers as far as interest rates going up and down, up and down, up and down, the average is still at 7%.
That's
So
correct.
with Dave saying that we're at 6.625, I believe is what the number that he mentioned.
Correct.
That's still less than the entire average of this lifespan, the current lifespan of the interest rate for mortgages, right? So if anybody's like questioning, like if now is the time, I think anything below 7.5% is still a decent rate. I mean, I remember when we first bought our house back in '93. I mean, I think the interest rate originally was definitely in the nines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, and like we were like scrounging, going, how are we going to afford this? Blah blah blah. Thankfully, interest rates dropped, and we got to refinance and whatever it is. But ultimately, I think interest rates are still good.
Yeah.
Are we going to see the 2 to 3? Personally, I don't think so, but that's not my expertise.
No, of course not. I mean, no one has the crystal ball. They might say they do, but it's, no one could tell. Again, from everything we've seen in history, if they do get down that low, it's because something really catastrophic has happened. They're doing that to get the needle moving as much as they can. So, and I firmly believe that that's what it would have to take to get to those kind of rates again. Back in the day when you were buying houses at 9% and some people went into double digits, they were also buying houses that cost a lot less too. But again, it was commensurate, right? It was commensurate to your earnings back then. So we're talking 20, 30 years ago, right? So, but now we're here today and we're looking at, 6.62 now to 7.25 rates, depending on credit. This is for par borrowers. This is for good borrowers with, solid FICO scores and DTIs and income levels and all those kind of things that could get the best rates. So, but there's still hard money rates out there and all these other things and stated income. And those are always going to be a little bit more. And if you're buying a second home, you're going to get hit with a little bit higher interest rates. So there's all kind of fluctuating numbers, right? Just based on your dynamics. And it's kind of a bespoke situation like Dave and I talked about before. It's each one is very custom tailored to you as the buyer of the property, right? So bear that in mind all the time. But anyways, you're right, George, that 7%, that would probably be a good average for like the last, 40 years or something, right? Where we've had all kinds of numbers all over the place. And again, you could also get in and you could buy those rates down, you could short-term rates and then play the market and see if the rate's going to come down in the next 2 to 3 years, save a lot of money on buying the rates down that way, or spend more money, buy them down for a 30-year lock. If you're doing a 30-year mortgage, you could lock them all the way down, but it's going to cost you more up front. But you could do that. And that'll also, if you got the extra coin up front, maybe you get a little kickback from your lenders, or maybe you hit a little concessions back from the seller of the property that could help out. And a lot of new construction is doing that too right now, where they have been offering very low interest rates. I was looking at one in the Vegas area here. They're doing a 4.99 right now for properties, and they're around $400,000 townhouses with brand new construction. And they're also doing $13,000 closing cost credits as well. So it's very, very sexy to look at the new construction right now when it comes to rates. Now, you got to look at the quality of these builds too. You want to get something solid as you can. So bear that in mind too, right? So, and they also sometimes increase the cost of the sale so they could present you with a lower interest rate, and it seems a lot better. So you got to look at the whole picture. You got to jot it down, look at the numbers, and try to make sense of that whole thing, So anyways, yeah, that's what's happening out there. Let me ask you about the overall mood of LA. Ask Dave, what's your thought about the overall mood in Los Angeles right now?
I agree with Dave. It's very somber. There's still a lot of people that have no idea how they're going to move forward. They're not getting the answers that they as quickly as they thought they would, whether it's through whether it's through the not necessarily SQL, but whether it's mostly through FEMA and the insurance companies, right? So, like we did last time when we had the podcast, there's a ton of paperwork to be filled out. If that paperwork is not filled out correctly, it creates delays.
Right.
So people are still kind of in the clouds on trying to figure out like what they're actually going to do, how they're going to move forward. And I think this is what's going to push a lot of people out. I mean, we're during our first roundup, I think we talked about how there are people that are looking to get out of California because of this, and like you said, there's the interest in the people purchasing properties outside of California, whether it's in Idaho or Nevada or Washington. I've heard a couple people already that are kind of considering going to Washington, which is a whole different climate. I mean, like we take trips with the family a lot, and we go to Utah and we visit family out in Utah.
Oh,
and
beautiful.
I don't know if I could live in Utah. It is cold.
Yeah.
We went there one time for Christmas, and we left a bottle of water in the car. We went back in, the bottle of water was frozen. I mean, like I think the most attractive aspect of Southern California is definitely the weather.
All day long. So, that's what we pay. We pay weather tax to live in California.
And at least these people are in a neighborhood where it's not snowing and freezing cold and
right.
I mean, this does bring up, like, you keep hearing that they're talking about how is the rains going to affect this area because we are going to have potential mudslides, right? And that's absolutely right. I think we did touch upon that last week as well. But it's and I've had many people ask me, well, how are you going to make sure that the house is secure and not going to fall down the hillside? I mean, that has to do, of course, like we talked about with the geology, the soils report, the foundation.
Right.
Whether we have to have piles and grade beams and how deep those have to go into bedrock. And again, we touched upon that last week. But I don't know if you could ever guarantee if your house is going to be where it was if we do have crazy rains that saturate.
It's going to be interesting.
So much.
Yeah. Definitely going to be interesting, George, for sure, 100%. George, I was going to ask you, are you seeing any kind of new types of builds or design coming up, like multifamily or more direction on the ADUs and that kind of thing? The guest houses, maybe they're adding onto the properties, that kind of thing?
Still, yeah, we still get constant calls about ADUs. I mean, I think if we do have the time during one of our next podcasts, or if you guys have me back, of course, but
absolutely,
I have like notes like crazy. I mean, for the whole ADU assembly bills, Senate bills that have kind of come into effect as far as January 1st. There's a lot of resources out there that you can actually look into to be able to find out. But yeah, we welcome people to give us a call and ask us what their property is capable of doing, whether it's the SB9. I don't know if you guys have heard about that, where you can actually have almost 4 units on one property. But that's
a newer one they just came out with, right? The SB9.
SB9 has been out for a little while, but there's also little new bills that have kind of come into effect that even to a certain degree go beyond the allowances of the SB9. The SB9 is mostly for single family, but there's other bills like that are focused around multifamily and how you can actually build like up to 8 units that I think we kind of discussed that as well. But I think we can dedicate an entire hour to kind of just sit here and kind of go over everything that's going through Sacramento relative to adding units. But yeah, the one thing that I wanted everybody to know, if you guys have the time, take a look at Google Maps and take a look at the satellite photos of Google Maps
Yeah.
of the Pacific Palisades area. It's updated after the fires, and it's really overwhelming. I mean, people can find out if their house burnt down just by going to Google Maps. And that's so scary. I
That is
couldn't
scary.
even
Yeah.
imagine.
Wow.
I mean,
Can't
like,
believe it.
oh, did
Yeah.
our house survive? And you're just going on the map, and you're like, oh, well, there's nothing there. Or, our house survived. Great. I mean, like, it looks like a war zone.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh, it's
looking at the
horrible.
map right now, and it's crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we were talking about it a little bit earlier, and our producer is going to try to get that put on the screen for us here at some point. Is that what you're putting in there, looking over the Palisades?
Yeah.
And again, I know I speak for George and me and our producer and Dave and Zach and everybody that's on the show all the time. Our hearts and our prayers go out to all the families out there that have been displaced and have been affected by these fires in so many different ways. And, we're here for you. We're also a great source of information of things that could definitely be very helpful to you in the process of the rebuild and getting back to life, right? So don't ever hesitate to reach back out to us at Cash for Callum, and we can always connect you with George Abatision or David Sousa or Zach Schneiderman very easily. Okay. So George, I do like your idea about talking about the ADUs. I think we should put a little podcast together on that and talk about just ADUs, because a lot of people have a lot of questions about those. And you're right. There's a lot of detail and dynamics about just that, right?
Correct. Yeah. There's so much information on that it's starting to overlap other codes and other bills. And we're going to have to get to a point to where we're just going to prepare what we prepare as far as the drawings are concerned, as far as the plans are concerned, getting it into the city and letting the city, whether it's the zoning department or the planning department, kind of tell us exactly how far we can push the envelope. Because ultimately, as designers, as developers, we're trying to push the envelope as much as possible to get the best product for our clients. So
when you say push the envelope, George, do you mean like as far as square footage, size, height, those kind of things?
Yeah, and I want to touch upon that as well with the fires, but we're always trying to figure out how square footage is calculated, what is exempt, what we can actually what way in which we can design it to where we can get bonuses. There's bonus availabilities, like you can get a 20% bonus if you design the house a certain way. We talked about the basement exemptions, of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, as far as pushing the envelope, again, price per square foot in certain areas, like the Pacific Palisades, I mean, you want the most square footage possible without necessarily impeding on your way of life, which is, of course, if you have kids, you want the yard and all this other stuff. But
right.
We're always trying to figure out how we can deliver in a way that is most efficient for the client. And not every client wants a 10,000 square foot house.
Right.
Some of them are just like, hey, I just want something moderate, 4,000 square feet. The 4 bedrooms, it's more than enough. I don't need all this space. And some people are just like, no, make it as big as possible, and let's make sure that it's grandeur and that it works and everything else. So,
right.
But, yeah.
And you tend to work with a certain demographic that would be something that would be more aligned with, they have a lot more luxury to kind of be able to do, 4,000 square feet is very small for them. They're like limiting themselves with that. Whereas other people, that's huge. That's like just couldn't wait to get into a 4,000 square foot home. They've actually got to buy and sell a couple homes just to get to that level, So super interesting. What are you seeing? I'll ask you real quick about trending these days as far as size of houses, because I'd heard the 2,500 square foot home is becoming a very popular size, and I happen to see that with a lot of new construction as well. But again, when you're looking at the demographic you work with a lot down in the Palisades and Pasadena and all that, Santa Monica, Marina del Rey, all these different areas, there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more options that people could exercise, when you're a little bit more affluent with money and those kind of things. So, but even then, I mean, what are you seeing an overall trend of square footage size, if you will?
Square footage size Yeah, everything pretty much, like even within the Alphabet Street areas and in the Huntington and all that. I mean, the Huntington is of course a lot more than the Alphabets, but in the Alphabets, majority of those houses are a minimum 2,300 square feet, even as a one story. I think the average house within the last 10 to 15 years is about 4,000 square feet. So as far as square footage, that's where it's going to be. The interesting part is going to be how the city is going to look at that 110% calculation,
Right.
and are they going to calculate covered patios and garages and how that math is going to work? Because, like I said, when some of these houses were originally built, they were built in a code or during a code that didn't calculate, whether a part of your garage was exempt, whether a covered patio was exempt,
Right.
whether a basement was exempt. Majority of the times, basements have been exempt, but still, I mean, it's going to be interesting how the city reacts to us potentially trying to, again, build at that 110% and how they're going to calculate that 110%. Majority of the time, of course, we have to have the records or some type of uh, previously approved plans for them to be able to go, yes, this is the hard number. This is what you're going off of. Even though every single permit has an inventory list of square footage on the back, uh, they're still going to be scrutinizing certain aspects of the application when it comes to square footage.
Gotcha. George, quick question. I've always been wondering this, and you're the perfect guy to ask this, but ceiling heights in homes. You got your standard home. It seems like the ceiling height in a standard average home, your average price home, not the kinds you're looking in the Palisades in Santa Monica, but well, maybe even some of those. There's a lot of single story homes. 8 foot seems to be kind of the basic height of a lot of ceilings. Is that right?
8 foot. Let's just put it this way: as far as when I'm designing anything that has an 8 foot ceiling, it's more than likely an ADU that is not necessarily in the Palisades. It's more than
Okay.
likely an ADU that's, whether it's in the Valley or the central Los Angeles area. Uh,
Okay.
Majority of the time when we design houses uh, in the more affluent neighborhoods, as far as Palisades and Beverly Hills and Malibu, majority of the time those ceilings are a minimum 9 feet. So
Minimum 9.
minimum 9 feet. And a
Yeah.
lot of times we'll go to 10 feet if we can. Again, that comes down to the zoning envelope allowances and how we can actually create higher ceilings relative to making sure that we're still within the height limit or envelope limit of a building.
Right.
Um, but going back to another aspect of it, in LA City has a certain rule where if the minute you go over 14 feet, that square footage counts twice. And of course, we have floor area ratios and the limitations that come about for floor areas. So, do we see 14-foot ceilings? Absolutely. And some people want to be able to go as tall as they can, whether it's a single story or a two-story.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think a popular, like, I don't know if you want to call it popular, but like I do see a lot of people asking for like 11-foot tall ceilings.
Yeah. Oh, those are
So
dynamite. 11 foot is a game changer.
yeah, exactly. Especially like when you're in the Brentwood area and you got views and you want the floor to ceiling, sliding doors and I mean just everything that you can kind of think of to pamper a property to make sure that it actually is it brings top dollar. Um,
Absolutely.
but 8 foot ceilings are definitely left more for like the accessory dwelling units.
Long time ago, though, way back, though, 8 foot was probably more of a common height, whereas you're saying 9 foot might be the common height today, or 10 feet. But I saw a lot of older homes I would look at. I'd see a lot of 8 foot ceilings in there, you know?
Yeah, well, remember that also had to do with the production of lumber, right? So when it came to your 8 foot tall ceilings, your studs came in 8 foot, your drywall came in 8 foot, your plywood came in 8 foot. So it made life a lot easier for building. So the minute you go to 9 feet, now you have a lot more cuts, a lot more waste, and things like that. So um, that's why there's people that also come to me and they're like, hey, well, I want to make sure that we stick to the 12 foot because they know, Certain studs come at 12-foot high. Certain drywall comes at 12-foot high. Somewhat plywood comes at at the same dimension as 12 foot. So they can kind of potentially be green in a sense of controlling the amount of waste that comes off the property, because that's a big problem as well. Like, I mean, we have to actually show how we're going to recycle material, whether we go with a certified waste hauler or whether we actually divide up the waste on site and dispose of it in the correct manner. There's certain guidelines that we have to abide by relative to waste as well. So
Right.
I don't know if we need to talk about like studs and stud sizes and stuff like that, but that it's the 8, 10, 12 number that people kind of usually try to stick to.
Okay. Yeah. And you're saying with the post, if you're going to go to 12-foot ceiling height, then that probably might be, I don't even want to say more affordable, but easier to work with, I guess, because less cuts and that kind of thing and less waste.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you're somewhere between, you got a lot of 9-foot and 10-foot heights, and then you might as well go 12 instead of 11, I guess. Does that sound about right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, hey, we all just learned something today. I know I just learned something, and I am a ceiling guy. I love high ceilings. Boy, that's a big game changer for me. I always look for that in a house. And I've always wondered, it's got to cost for about every foot you go up. It just costs that much more to build that house. Yeah?
It does. It does. And I mean, you also have to take into consideration the more volume space you have inside of a house, the more heat gain and heat loss that you have. You have to take into account the type of insulation that you're actually going to be putting in. You have to take into account the tonnage relative to the HVAC system and how much electricity you're pulling off. Do you need more solar panels to be able to offset that? There's a lot of little nuances relative to tall ceilings that, people come in and, I want the highest ceilings possible.
Yeah.
And then, it takes them, and then they found out that they have to install a certain type of glass on all of their doors and windows to make sure that it's low E squared or whatever it may be,
Right.
to counter the heat gain or opposite thereof, so they can actually cool and heat the house properly.
Yeah. Without it costing an arm and a leg, which today already does cost an arm and a leg. So you've got to be very careful. We've had houses with 2-story high ceilings and lots of 12-foot high ceilings, and absolutely love them, have to have it, but yeah, it comes at a cost, heating and cooling those are going to cost you more money. And then again, if the construction was not done correctly with the proper insulation and those type of things, boy, that could get very costly for you, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha.
And, there's times where we design these houses that have gigantic sliding glass doors facing south. Of course,
Love those.
they're beautiful. They're awesome, to be able to have that indoor outdoor feel. But there's so much heat gain that comes through those, through the glass at that point. We have to sometimes design it to where we have insulation in the ceiling and in between the roof rafters to make sure that the actual attic space cools down before that gets transferred back into the main indoor air conditioned space. So, there's a lot of little things that we try to do, and it's still possible. It's just, how far are you willing to go?
Right. George, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, I've shown a lot of nice, big, beautiful homes, and the floor to ceiling windows, the big slider windows that are just gorgeous. And they're just like, wow. They're just like the focal point when you walk into a room between the high ceilings and these floor to ceiling glass sliders. But again, a lot of people, I think, don't consider that's great as long as this house is built by someone like George, who's gone in there and done it correctly, right? Otherwise, and I don't know, companies like Toll Brothers, I love Toll Brothers, great company. They're the number one luxury builder for, what's the word I'm trying to say here?
Medium to
a production luxury builder. They're pumping them out like crazy, but they're pumping out a lot of very luxury, beautiful homes. Toll Brothers, they've done a great job. I love the two brothers that started this. Their dad was a builder. They were going to college. One was going to be an accountant, and the other can't quite remember what he was going to do. But they had college degrees, and then they just all of a sudden one day said, "You know what? We're going to build homes just like Dad." And they put together these two brothers. The Toll Brothers put together their first two homes. That was back in, I believe it was Michigan. and they've been going ever strong ever since. And these guys have won all kinds of awards with not only being the best builder, but also the best run company. Like Forbes magazine has given them all kinds of awards for that. And just the way they run their company, the personnel in their company, any warranties or any problems after the sale. They just have a tremendous reputation. What's your opinion of that? Have you heard anything like that for a big luxury production builder like Toll Brothers, George?
We have. I don't necessarily know how that would happen. Toll Brothers is a great example. I've been to several of their developments, and they do an amazing job. But are they going to be able to come in and pretty much rubber stamp out a bunch of houses? I mean, is it possible? 100% it's possible. They do it day in and day out as far as the way in which they build their developments. I think it is possible, but I think it's at the end of the day, it's going to get to the point to where when a person starts to look into buying a house in the Palisades, they're going to go, well, is this one of those like developments, or is it actually a custom-made home? Ultimately, custom-made homes bring more than development, or developed homes, or mass market homes,
right?
Whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, I think that's the question that's going to come up: is if these houses were they built by as a custom house, or were they built by someone like Toll Brothers? And I think it's a very, very fair possibility that people, when after all this is said and done, and the neighborhoods are back, the houses are built, people are going to be very aware of who actually built the houses and how they were actually designed.
Yep.
And that's all going to be public record, right? I mean, we go today, you go to ladbs.org, you could pull up the records and try to see, who was the original engineer, who was the original owner, who was whatever it may be. I mean, that's all going to be public record.
Right. Absolutely. But what you said brings a good point, because a lot of people see these different types of beautiful homes and the different elements in there that just capture their attention, right? And pulls into the emotions, and they're ready to buy this house just based on that, just the pure looks. And how are my friends and family going to feel when they come in and see me in this house that's gorgeous, right? But then they're not thinking about things like what you've mentioned. How was it built? How was it made? How efficient is it going to be? And listen, might not be something you're thinking about right now because you can afford to buy this home, but you got to look down the road when you're looking at high energy costs in this world today. That's something you got to really think about. And when the cubic feet increases like this, that you have to heat and you have to cool and insure and all these different types of things, you've got to really start thinking outside the box a little bit about those things and not just be blown away and sucked in by all the emotional attachment with the luxury look of everything. It's got to make a lot more sense. And that's why I love what you do, George. That you're bringing a lot of intellect into the whole building and design of these homes, and that's why you're a custom builder, man. That's what you're paying for. You get what you pay for, right?
Exactly. At the end of the day, it also has to do a lot with sustainability. Making sure that we are using certain materials that are friendly to the environment. I mean, that's a big part of the green code, of course, that came into effect a few years ago, and also the way in which we like to look at all of our projects and try to make sure that it is sustainable.
Gotcha. Say that last part again, George.
Oh, just want to make sure that as far as that everything relative to building is using materials that are sustainable, that are part of the green code, that are overall friendly to the environment, and just so that we know that we're helping rather than hurting.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because this is a huge scar. I mean, with everything that's happened, I mean, I'm looking at the map again as far as the Google map. It's just if you can just imagine everything that's in these houses that burned. I mean, we're not even talking about the insulation that was in there. We're not talking about the drywall, the stucco, the roof material. We're talking about all the physical pieces that are in a house that it once burnt. They're toxic, right? So, I mean, I think it is our responsibility as whether it's designers and architects and engineers and whatever you want to call it, to be able to help the earth and not hurt the earth, and be able to
Right.
use these sustainable materials to where they're friendly to the environment overall.
Absolutely. George, couldn't agree more. 100%, man. Absolutely. That's very cool. And yeah, looking at that Google map that you're looking at of the devastation is just, that's disturbing to look at, huh?
It's amazing. It's so devastating.
Absolutely. Well, listen, and for that reason, our like I said, our hearts and our prayers go out to everybody out there that have been affected by this. And again, we're here. If you have any questions or anything, please like and subscribe on the channel here so we can keep bringing you more great information. We'll have Mr. Avatician back on again if he would be so kind to join us. George, think we can get you back on again sometime?
Of course, of course.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
We can talk about ADUs and or whatever else is going on in the market at the time, and things that would be important to you to know, what's going on out there and with the building and development out there, because there is a ton to know. Absolutely. As you probably have caught a little wind of that so far. But George, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you again for joining us, my friend. Really appreciate you coming on the show. And everybody out there, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.